Welcome to another session of Charted. It's another week, and I think many people have been watching the charts over this Easter long weekend because it's definitely been a lot of action. How are you going, Shanky?
Doing well, Paul. Absolutely right. I think the weekend saw a ton of action across the crypto ecosystem, and of course, ETH in particular saw some massive price action breaking its all-time highs. So yes, a lot happened over the Easter weekend.
Nice. Well, before we jump into today's topic, just a reminder for all of you that are tuning in, this is purely educational content. We put this out there for everyone to kind of grow and learn together. Absolutely not investment advice. However, if you do like what we're sharing, please subscribe, like, comment, let us know what it is that you're liking, because we want to keep making more of what you guys want to see and hear.
Absolutely, yeah, and we'll follow up in our newsletter as well. So, we've been bringing that out. We are, of course, doing live sessions with guests, and then this charted session, and then the newsletter. And I think the topics that is more liked, obviously, will get more covered. So, yeah, do let us know.
Excellent. So what's the kind of topic of today's Charted here, Shanky?
I think we go back to a few things we have looked at previously. In my opinion, the best thing to start with maybe ETH itself, since all the action and all the energy is in ETH. And then maybe we dig into a little bit of the ETH challengers, because they've also been gaining a ton of traction soon after. And then after that, we can go back to some of the, the DeFi tokens, DeFi assets that have also seen interesting momentum. We've studied them, week back and the week prior to that. And we can go back to our charts and see how it has panned out, right? What the price action has been like and where it's headed. So maybe that's what we should cover today.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I'm definitely excited to see how all of those are kind of adapting and evolving. So let's jump into the charts and looking at ETH.
Perfect. Yeah, that's the right place to start. So, the one piece that you can look at straight from the chart is that it broke its all-time high, right? I had this Fibonacci levels, if you may, drawn out, which was trying to gauge how it had retraced with respect to the massive upswing that it had seen starting back in beginning of 2021, and then until mid-February when it reached late February when it reached its 2000 plus mark. So this is what we had drawn and we were tracking. The prices had retraced a fair bit, and then we saw it bounce back. And since the second week of March, we did see it hovering around close again to its all-time high, but it couldn't sustain it, and it sort of retraced back one more time, saw a little pullback. But this weekend, the Easter weekend, I think saw it cross that that sort of threshold, if you may, right, and reach and create new all-time highs. So that's the interesting news here. That is really the big news, if you may. If you look at the chart, I think what's worth noting is that we saw a lot of buying momentum, a lot of buying pressure starting about the 25th or 26th of March, right? So prior to that, the entire week we had seen the price being pulled down. Perhaps there was a bit of profit taking, and also a little bit of bearish momentum building, because we also saw the ETH price breach the both EMA 20 and then the EMA 50, and at some level it was looking like, is it going to hold, is it going to stay there, right? And it was becoming a little questionable. And then when we reached 25th, we saw the buyers stepping in, and there was a period of indecision, the classic sort of doji candle, if you may. Again, just to review what these candles mean, this one, I'm going to just zoom in a little bit, is a candle whose body is super thin, right? It's very small. And what you see is just long legs on both sides, right, with a super thin body. And the way to read that, the way to understand that is that neither the buyers nor the sellers are in control. Both are trying to tussle from both sides, right, from their own viewpoint.
Right.
And what is really resulting is that the open and close are almost next to each other, right? And I think technically, if you spoke to market technicians, they would maybe argue and put some numbers saying that, hey, if the difference between open and close was only 5%, then it qualifies technically as a doji. Otherwise, perhaps it's one of the spinning tops or some other sort of a pattern. But I think irrespective of whatever it's called, the important thing to take away here is that this is definitely a period of indecision, right? Neither the buyers nor the sellers are in control, and the open and close is very close, which essentially means the market opened, there was a lot of activity, these sort of long legs, the long wicks, but it ended up being where it started, right? So
right.
That's what happened on 25th, right? And
that kind of candle pattern you're mentioning there, that can happen on any time scale, right? It's not just on the daily charts.
That's correct. Yeah. So, each of these candle patterns essentially monitor the open, high, low, close. They are effectively mapping that. They are drawing that for a given time frame. So in this particular case, we like to look at the day time frame, and it is the day time frame. But yeah, if I went to a hourly time frame, for example, I'm sure I will find some which will be similar. So for example, here you go, right? 4th of April, we saw a little doji type of a pattern build up on the 20th hour. I think it's 8 p.m. UTC on 4th of April, and we saw a similar kind of a pattern, right? Now, of course, the time frame in this case, Paul, is the hourly, so which means it was the open and close of that hour were pretty much at the same level. So yeah, absolutely, they can happen at every time frame, right? So the patterns don't change. Of course, the values are different because you're looking at either an entire day, or you're looking at an hour, or 4 hours, or a week, or whatever other time frame that you've chosen to look at, right? So that's really the way to read it. And the part I want to add to it is after that day of indecision, ETH just took off. I mean, there was no stopping ETH after that. We see these large candles. So just compare, look at these two candles, for example, day after day, right? The very following day, this particular candle's body is easily, I would say, like 15 times, maybe more than, this candle's body, right? So this is very clear that obviously the buyer stepped in, and buyers stepped in and took the price from about 1589 and took it all the way up to 1699. So that's over $100, $110 net positive increase in a single day, which is also like fairly big movement. Now we should also look at perhaps average true range to just look at how big is that movement, right? So look at the average true range. It's almost this is how ETH has been moving. Actually looks like if you take the 14-day RMA of the daily movement, looks like it moves about $125. So yeah, so it did that big move. It did that move on the 26th, and then it followed with a few other large big green candles, right? And so what we ended up with is breaching the all-time high and then going as far up as I think 2147. So I think that's probably as high as it has gone so far, right? So 2144 perhaps, but 2140 plus, right? Somewhere there. And then again on the 3rd, which I think was the just beginning of the weekend, we saw a little bit of profit taking, the price come back, but I don't think the buyers were yielding to the sellers. They weren't giving up. And so the price has come right back up, and it's again closed enough to its all-time high. So that's the story here, Paul. And I think the key takeaway here, at least that one should, just looking at this chart, one should take away is that ETH is on a massive upswing, right? It almost seems like this is, a second parabolic rise in the making, right? So just like we saw earlier, where it went all the way from, 576, and took it all the way to 2000. There is like a nice, good positive momentum building, right? With a lot of green candles, one after the other, showing that the buyers are in control. And also that if you look at this gap, the gap between these candles and the EMA 20, that has substantially increased, right? So that definitely shows that it's fairly parabolic. It's, fairly a big, massive swing up. So ETH looks good. ETH looks healthy. And I think if you ask me in terms of any trend trader, I think, yes, you should be looking at long positions. Now, of course, again, this is not investment advice, and this is just our opinion, right? Paul, your and my opinion, as we're just eyeing the charts and trying to understand what they are. But if you just logically look at it, I would say hold the horses, right? Don't jump in and enter the market right away. I know it's very tempting to sort of enter the market and say, hey, I want to be part of this upswing. But it's always good to look at a little bit of retracement and let the price settle out a little bit, right? So now if you had entered somewhere here on the 29th, you were lucky and you were smart because, you saw the candles move back up green and, you probably rode this wave. And perhaps you were one of those, a trader who took this profit down, right? So it's possible that, right, there was some of those traders who played this big swing move. But for the next trader, I think the right entry point was perhaps the green after the red. But even better would be wait for some level to be tested again. So perhaps it could be one of these sort of levels, if you may, around 1948. It seems like. Let me just draw this quickly. So if I look at this, seems like an area of support more or less, because we've seen price bounce back from here. So if you look at this 1939 type of a range, if this tests the 1939, yeah, that might be a good time to look at re-entering. Or perhaps it might come back and retest the EMAs, right? Maybe EMA 20 for sure. And so yeah, maybe it may not go all the way back to EMA 50, although we've seen two surges or two particular instances where it has come all the way back, retraced, and then gone back up. So those are the opportunities, I think, to look at.
Great. Yeah, no, it's definitely looking like that new trend is forming. And yeah, as you say, that gap between the EMA and the candles is looking very positive.
That's correct. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Now, one more quick piece that I want to look at is the one that traders like to look at, which is the ETH BTC. So the other one was, of course, ETH USD, which was really looking at the ETH price, so to speak, with respect to a standard fiat. But ETH BTC is another interesting metric to look at. The reason traders like this, Paul, is because it's the same set of people. At least there is a common set, may not be everyone, but a common set of people who trade either ETH or BTC or both. And when you start seeing price action in either one of them more than the other, I think you may start seeing some portfolios shift in favor of the one that is commanding a better premium or commanding a better sort of a trend.
Sure.
Right. So it just makes sense for anybody who's a large portfolio to say, okay, I'm going to move a little more ETH. They will probably hold both. They'll say, I'm going to go a little more ETH as compared to BEC, and vice versa, depending on whichever one is in control. Right. And what we're seeing is that for a good period of time in February and March, BTC was rallying. ETH was also rallying, as we saw from the charts, but relatively speaking, as compared to BTC, it was actually bearish. Right. So definitely, I think in this period, it made sense for investors to go, double down on BTC, because BTC is where all the price action was. What we are seeing after this weekend is that the story has reversed, right? And now all the action seems to be heavily in favor of ETH. And we might even see these, you see the two moving averages here sort of kissing each other, and it might just cross. And we'll see how that pans out, which might, again, indicate that ETH is perhaps in a more stronger trend, if you may. Both are uptrend, both are strong trends, but a stronger trend, relatively stronger trend as compared to BTC. So something again to look at.
Correct. All right, should we jump into the challenges? Because I guess that's the other part of the story is sometimes even as ETH goes up, the potential challenges to ETH are also expected to follow a similar trajectory. Is that what we're seeing? Let's find out.
Let's look at that. Yeah, it's a valid point. I think the entire market is sort of bullish. So I have no doubts that, they're all seeing sort of good positive price action. But certainly the challengers, which are coming up with innovative alternatives, are seeing a lot of love. And they have been seeing a lot of love and attention for the last few months. And yeah, it'll be worthwhile to see how it has reacted to the ETH price sort of going strong and parabolic and sort of reasserting its strong trend. So you look at DOT, for example, Polkadot, which is looked at as a challenger for ETH. sort of the newer chain in the block, but one of, put together by one of the Ethereum co-founders, and certainly has a lot of good momentum and a good energy with their earlier in the year, Kusuma and other kinds of action that has spurred some activity within that ecosystem. What we are seeing here is an interesting piece here. So, irrespective of just the trend, of course, the trend is visible. We don't even have to really study too hard to see all these big green candles. But a thing to note here, and an interesting piece here, is that there was a period when it had become fairly range bound, right? So we did see the strong growth all the way from, I think, about $5 to a point where it had reached as high as about 42, right? So there was a good, massive, big upswing. And then after that, there was a period where I think it was sort of bound there between sort of 30 and 40 price levels. So if we look at this, I'm just going to draw these couple of lines out, ignoring the long wicks for a minute. And if you look at this one roughly here, the price was sort of bound here, right? So between 30 and 39, like I was sort of guessing, between 30 and 40. So between the two, it was sort of stuck there, right? And that was interesting because it meant two things. It meant one thing, that obviously the buyers were still around, right? The price wasn't crashing down and burning. But they weren't with very strong conviction. They weren't willing to break through that $39, $40 mark, right? So that $39, $40 mark was acting as a strong resistance. And so that's why we see a little bit of this movement where, the price would build up a little bit, and then, it will retrace back to around 30, and it would, rebuild up a second time. Now, markets tend to move like that, so that's not surprising. But certainly, I think we saw more recently where it broke down below the 20 and the 50 EMA, and it was looking like it's going back into the 30 category and might, in fact, retrace further down, right? But what this weekend did, and I guess this is partially to the overall positive energy in the market, is that it just took it all the way up, and we do see it breaking through that resistance level. Right, so that's a good sort of positive move for DOT. What I do want to point out in this is that certainly there are 2 wicks which are making me curious, and I would, because of these 2 long wicks, would wait and watch a little bit. So we saw on April 3rd, this is again a sort of form of a doji, if you may. It's not exactly technically a doji, but it is sort of close enough to a doji because, again, the open and close were pretty close. The body is very small, but at a long upper wick, right? And these kinds of patterns, by the way, are called gravestone dojis, right? So went all the way up, but couldn't hold it, and went all the way down. If it was the other way around, if this body was hanging right up top, then people like to call it the dragonfly doji. But cool. Right, but irrespective of the names, I think what this really says is, again, hey, the buyers tried to push it up, but the sellers came in control and pushed it all the way down. And then we saw the reverse of that on the 5th, although the price closed lesser than where it opened. So there's a red one, but it did not close all the way down. The sellers were trying to bring it all the way down to 41, but it sort of held itself, and buyers still stepped in. So that's good. That's good news for DOT. But I think that one will need to observe this carefully to see what the next pattern would be.
Yeah, it's also interesting, that kind of the timing was there, and I saw the same on Twitter of people kind of going, ETH all-time high, but what about the Cardano all-time high? And there was a little bit of rivalry there. And that next move, does it kind of stay in step with Ethereum if Ethereum's going up, or does it diverge back down to its range? It's going to be really interesting to see.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's look at Cardano as well. Cardano, by the way, is something that I don't understand. I must say that. The reason I say that is not because of I can't understand this chart. I mean, that's easy to read. It's been a good big sort of uptrend for Cardano. What I'm unable to understand really in the Cardano story is that it's being looked at as a, one of the front runners or sort of the, major challengers, but there isn't really a lot of true activity on that network yet. So perhaps it will, just attract the entire ecosystem, and they might end up, being like a live and buzzing ecosystem in future. But right now, it seems to me like I think the price is ahead of the action, right? So in some sense, you start seeing people becoming already very bullish, and there's a lot of price action, and people are extremely in favor of it. But perhaps all the activity might follow it, right? So that's something to watch out for, right? Like something to just kind of keep in the back of mind.
Yeah, and it's definitely something we've seen in previous years with, say, EOS or Tron, where, yeah, the price got far, far ahead of the actual network adoption. And yeah, a network is only as valuable as its effects and the liquidity and what's actually built on it. So yeah, it's definitely one to watch out for.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. And I think those were great examples. That's how I look at it. I kind of look at Cardano as the EOS or Tron 2.0. I do think of DOT and BNB slightly differently, but that may just be my biased opinion. The charts for all of them, of course, are bullish and on an uptrend. So purely from an uptrend standpoint, yeah, it's tough to say one is going up and the other is going down. That's not true, right? They're all going up. Now,
Yep.
What is worth looking at, though, here, Paul, is that while we saw this weekend of flurry of upsurge in activity, the Cardano price, perhaps because it's already at at a very high range and close enough to its all-time high, which was like 1.4 or 1.6, and now it being, I think, in the top 5 for a bit in terms of overall valuation, we did actually see less price movement. So if you look at all of these candles, right, starting from 27th or 28th of March, all the way till 5th, the candles are very small. The bodies are very small. In some cases, there are long wicks, but even the wicks aren't as big as we saw earlier, let's say on 16th of March or 26th of Feb or 10th of Feb or even back on the 5th or 6th of Feb, right? So what that really means is, I think, two things. One, that I think the market is either in a accumulation or a distribution phase. I would say this looks a little bit more like distribution to me, because it has definitely seen a lot of price upsurge. And what it also looks like is that people are unable to decide where the price should be. Should it go up further? Should it break down and get into bearish territory? And so this is really going through that, the sort of indecision, inaction period, where the price discovery is in process between buyers and sellers. People are still trying to figure out which direction it should go in.
Interesting. Yep.
So,
See that.
yeah, and I would suggest looking at MACD as well, because MACD is actually a very good one to look at that price momentum. And yeah, it tells the same story. If you look at all these bars here in the MACD case, which is essentially a difference of 12 and 26 moving average, is all becoming very small, right? So it's becoming very quiet, so to speak, right? These were all like big actions, one way or the other, right? And now it's all getting a little quiet. So we'll see where it moves in the next big move, if you may. This will also be a sign for perhaps some sort of a breakout, either a positive or a negative one. It could happen. Like, this is definitely one of the things that happens prior to breakouts, and so yeah, it very well could happen that it upsurges and just takes off to, again, new all-time high, or just sort of there aren't enough buyers left and the sellers take control and bring it down.
Sure.
Okay, last one, BNB. I think we've studied BNB a little bit. BNB also, like ETH, I believe, broke its all-time high over this weekend. In fact, today looks like it's higher than its price that it had reached.
Yeah, I actually got the push notification from the Binance app on my phone as we were coming into the call. So yeah, they're already kind of calling it today, but we'll see exactly on close where that lands. There's just a few more hours there.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the BNB chart looks, at least the last couple of days, similar to ETH. Very strong green bars, lots of buyers in action and pushing the price up, right? And obviously taking it beyond its all-time high. Again, the trend is very strong. There's a big gap between the EMA 20 and the candles more recently. And again, from an entry point, I would say it would be wise to look for an opportune moment. It could be one of these support levels where it might bounce off which is say something like the 315 type range, or it could just come back and retest EMA 20, which it has done a few times, right? So if you look at BNB, it has tested here back on 23rd, it tested again on 28th, and then it has tested a few times through March. It even breached it briefly for a couple of days, but it has been in and around EMA 20. So it's possible that on its journey up, it might come back sometime in future and retest the EMA 20, and that might be a good time again to re-enter in case you're bullish on BNB.
Yeah, and like where we started with ETH of kind of that that distance above the EMA 20 where the candles are sitting. Yeah, really similar here for BNB and as well DOT. So yeah, really puts Cardano as the kind of outlier there in terms of the trend of the challengers and ETH.
Valid point, yeah, 100%. Okay, so I think that's an interesting story. ETH is going strong, challengers are going strong. There's a lot of positive action all around. Let's look at DeFi. What's happening in the world of DeFi?
Cool.
So maybe it's worthwhile to start with Comp. Comp had a lot of positive action over the last couple of days, the last few days rather. Comp generally is one of the leaders in the pack, right? It has been the sort of the front runner in this entire yield farming story through the DeFi summers of 2020, and then it did see a lot of good positive adoption as well as price action through the rest of the year. And of course, we've seen that token price, the Comp token price, go all the way from sub 100 to an all-time high, which has been closer to about 569, right? And what we're seeing is we reached back to that all-time high levels, more or less. We were very close to it again, right? If you look at Comp's price on over the weekend, it reached about 563, I believe, or 564, which is very close to its all-time high. Also saw a ton of buyers momentum here, buyers stepping in. There was a period, again, our listeners may recall, Paul, as you and I were discussing, there was a period when the DeFi tokens were seeing a fair bit of retracement, right? In fact, all of them.
Yeah, that was just across the board. Yep.
Exactly, right. And so Comp was also down. It was unclear somewhere around this, mid to late March period, whether it is going to now enter into a bearish territory or would it recover, and where do we see the price going next. And in fact, I think last charted we were also sort of again guessing that either it's going to break out and go all the way up, or it might see newer bearish levels, or maybe even 0.618 levels of fib retracement. Of course, given that the entire crypto market is bullish and the trend is still strong, I think we were guessing, and of course it's a guess. Let's be clear, right? This is not like we can do some crystal ball gazing. Yep. Nobody can really, but I think the guess was just given the indications, right? Rather, if you just read the market and you see the overall market is still bullish, it's very strong uptrend, and then these prices have retraced quite a bit, and they were getting ready to sort of break out as the two EMAs were merging, and the candles were becoming a little smaller, a little more range bound, or had retraced enough. It was looking like it will break out in the direction where it becomes again more bullish, and I think that's what we've seen. That's what's happened. The next part we have to see is where does it go next, right? Within the day, we've also seen a large enough red candle, which does show that there are enough people willing to sell at these prices, right? And so we'll see whether it goes back up and takes it up and beyond its all-time high, or does it now find this, sort of 550-ish level as the new level of resistance, and sort of stays positive, but as continues to bounce back from that 550 level.
Great. And I'm expecting similar for AAVE, but it's not going up towards its all-time high. It's kind of, more range bound still there from the Fibonacci kind of indicator we were looking at last week.
That's correct. Yeah. So, unlike Comp, which saw good sort of bounce back and a good, nice positive movement back to its all-time high, we're not seeing that with AAVE. In fact, if you look at AAVE's price, and again, we have the fibs drawn from last week it's pretty clear that there's still substantial amounts of retracement. It's closer to the 38.2.382 level. You can basically draw a couple of conclusions out of it. One conclusion, an obvious one, could be that it's still trying to figure out its next price level. It hasn't really found it yet, right? Comp found it, and it has gone and broken out up top. AAVE is still sort of, in that discovery mode. And given that the market is all still trending upwards, I don't expect it to, fall and crash all the way down, but it's possible that it might retrace some more before it starts seeing some more positive action.
Yeah, I'm also seeing yesterday's wick was still just tipping below the EMA 20 as well. So yeah, it's definitely not as bullish as the others we've looked at.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm actually willing to consider that it might come back and retest this roughly 300 or 302 level, because that's the story that has played out a couple of times after its all-time high, right? Where the retracement starts, it tries to sort of stay at certain range, and then it cannot hold it, and it goes all the way back down. And then, of course, the buyers step in at about this 300 price range, and it sees some positive motion. So we've seen that play out a couple of times, and I think that possibly that might be a story that's emerging. Now, one could also look at it slightly differently, which is if you start thinking of this in terms of a trend line. So let's just look at maybe a trend line. You see that it's you could argue that the trend is in fact a way where you're getting towards a descending triangle. Okay, now that is usually not good for the price, which means that perhaps the selling pressure is much higher. But because the market is overall very bullish, I wouldn't really buy into it too much. I wouldn't get overboard with that sort of technical indicator. One has to understand that every technical indicator needs to be looked at in context, right? And so if the market was turning bearish, I would say, yeah, this is a dangerous one, because now we are looking at, this sort of a descending triangle being formed, right? With lower highs, and then it's retesting the support at 302. And then, one could guess that not only would it come back and retest the 302, but perhaps, it might go below that, right? So that's what just purely looking at charts would tell you. But every technical analysis needs to be seen in context. It cannot just be seen in isolation. And so I would say it's not worthwhile to draw that conclusion yet, just because the market is still very positive. Things in crypto usually crash when the market is positive only if there's a hack or something else, an externality like that. Otherwise, the buyers tend to step in and take the price back up. So I would just wait and watch on this one.
Okay, that makes sense to me as well. Should we look at Maker? And for those of you subscribers, you probably might have already seen it. Session with one of the risk analysts working for Maker Foundation called Will Remore. So if you haven't seen it, do check that out, because that really gave some behind the scenes insight into how those collateralization parameters and the whole system, or engine room, if you like, of Maker and where it's going next with real world assets. So that's definitely one of those original DeFi projects, but seemingly they're not finished yet. They want to take on all the rest of traditional finance first before they rest on their laurels.
Yeah, it was really fun. I think I would just second that we really enjoyed chatting with Will, and I think the listeners should go check it out. There's a lot of good, nice content from the people sort of, behind the scenes, if you may, who are working on a lot of this modeling and, the sort of collateralization and other kind of important inputs that, make this system happen. So yeah, good stuff for sure. Okay, so coming back to the Maker price, we won't spend too much energy here, but again, Maker is a little more bullish than AAVE, but I don't see it moving as aggressively as Comp yet. It does seem like there was some positive action a couple of days. The price moved all the way back up to 2,500, but then sort of retraced a fair bit with a big long red candle. And now it is back again, still EMA 20 plus, right? So still the trend is positive, and it has come out of its period of sort of, the period of sort of indecision, if you may, or the period when it was looking like it was going bearish. So it has certainly come out of it, but it hasn't come out as strongly and as clearly as COM did. So that's really,
Sure.
I think, the highlight of the maker price action.
And yeah, the volumes there are also a lot lower than what we saw in previous kind of upward movements in January and February. So yeah, it's not making a big move.
That's actually a great observation. That's a great observation. The volume seems to have almost died down here. There's very little volume, and which again means that neither side nor buyers, not buyers, not sellers, both are sort of waiting and watching to an extent.
Yeah, it's kind of not much higher than their 2020 kind of average volume. Looking at some of those back to the left of the chart there. So yeah, let's see if there is a bigger movement, perhaps following an announcement, or inversely if there's any technical issues or hacks. It's always exciting.
Yeah, totally. So we'll keep an eye on it. We of course like DeFi, and we've been covering it through our charted sessions. We'll also have some of that DeFi stuff in our next newsletter, which should be out this week, perhaps later today. And I think, yeah, we will keep an eye on this and try and continue to study this. Okay, the last three in the pack. Now, again, for those listeners who have seen our sessions, prior sessions of Charted, they would have they might remember that within the DeFi ecosystem, there are essentially two cohorts or two groups. One is all these sort of lending-centric, yield farming-centric players like Comp, AAVE, Maker, and we think even SNX is more or less there. And the price action in those, at least for the largest part, was very correlated. We measured that using our tool that was measuring exact sort of statistical correlation, and it was showing a very high correlation, a very positive and high correlation. And then we realized there was a second cohort or a second group, which was essentially these AMM marketplaces like Uni and Sushi. And then, of course, the newer play in the block Cake, which is one of the biggest applications I understand in the new BNB or the BSC smart chain ecosystem. So let's look at that second set, Uni, Sushi, and Cake before we wrap up our session for today.
Yeah, and also one of the interesting things we saw in our DeFi index special was that both Uni and Sushi almost had 0.9 correlation plus with some of the popular DeFi index kind of instruments there. So you could have just held either one of those and got a similar performance to the DeFi index itself. So that was also interesting. But this is the first time we're kind of bringing Cake into them to see how they compare.
Absolutely right. In fact, let's do that. Maybe let's just draw them all on one chart first so that pictorially we see what it looks like. Just add this in, same scale, and I would add Cake also. And see what it looks like. All USDT priced, so all the denominations are also the same. And here, if you look at it, that's interesting. Of course, Cake doesn't have a long enough history as compared to Uni and Sushi. It looks like Cake has held more or less at the same price level for a little bit, which is, by the way, a good, handsome price level. And we look at where it is right now, relatively speaking. Uni has certainly seen an upswing, but with sort of healthy pullbacks. And then Sushi seems to be the most volatile, going back and forth and spiking all over the place, but of course correlating with Uni if you average it out, right? So that's an interesting sort of curve, just sort of eyeballing it. Let's look at, so let me remove these and just look at each one of them individually. So if you look at Uni is still at a sort of good positive uptrend, $30 plus. What we see recently, in fact, today there's that indifference doji farming, and as I had mentioned, this is like one of those classic dragonfly dojis, right, where the body is right up top. So the market opened here and it's closing here. But of course, during the day, the sellers pushed the price all the way down to EMA 20, but the buyers stepped in and brought it back up to where it opened.
Nice.
So yeah, this is an interesting one to just look at. What I see with Uni though, and something that I think we had mentioned this earlier as well, is that Uni seems to move in an interesting pattern as far as price action goes. It tends to have a lot of long wicks, right? We've seen periods when the wicks are like almost sometimes longer than the body, so extremely long wicks. And apart from these long wicks, suddenly there are periods when we see very large candles, right? We saw this massive green candle, which in a single day took the price from 20 to 28. So, almost took it $8-9 up on a $20 base. And then we saw another one, a big move up here, which took it all the way up to 34. And then in the end of March, towards the end of March, we saw similar to red candles, which were big red candles, and moved the price down. So certainly this seems very volatile. It seems like extremely volatile asset, but overall still, net positive. I would just look at average true range to see how much is it moving at a daily level, and there you go. So it moves about $2 to $3 on a daily level, which again, considering crypto and considering where it is, it's not that bad. But I think it gives an interesting opportunity to traders who like to indulge in swing trading, because you see this asset which is moving almost $3 every day, and then suddenly it comes up with big green and big red candles. Now, of course, if you're on the wrong side of the play, then you're going to lose your money. But if you're on the right side of things, you could have a good, nice profit there, right? So something to sort of keep in mind. Sushi, there you go. It's Sushi. Sushi, interestingly, seems to be breaching its 50 MA, and not that I would read too much into it, because again, the prices have gone a whole lot up as compared to its $2 price. And of course, it has also seen a $23 upswing and then back again down to $14 territory. So it's really a lot more volatile, in fact more volatile than Uni, and sort of moves the same amount, moves about $2.50 every day, been fairly volatile, and right now seems like it's in a little bit of a bearish territory. Not really bearish because it has not really broken the the 50 EMA in a big way. The gap is not that big, and plus also, if you just purely look at the price action, forget the EMAs for a minute, you will see that it's mostly range bound, right? So here is one price here roughly, which is about 16, which is acting as resistance. And then if you start looking at another line around here, I think this is definitely acting as support, 14. And if you go back also in time, it looks like it does come around this 14 level. It has come around the 14 level a few times, even during its upswing, and it bounces back from there. So perhaps if you're a swing trader, this is a good point to enter, right? So now we see a red candle. If it hits around 14, bounces back to a green, maybe there's an opportunity there, right, to do a little swing trade.
Sure.
All right. So now let's go to the last one. This one has limited amount of price because, obviously Cake hasn't been around for too long. Cake, by the way, just irrespective of its price action, is seeing a ton of interesting movement, just because all the total value locked and, all the yield farming action on the Binance Smart Chain is really in and around Cake. And so I think that it's certainly at the center of all that action on BSC, and perhaps the price action is a function of that, right? As more and more people are coming and getting benefits from Cake and holding to Cake, there are certainly some people who are selling it, but I think a majority are seeing promise in this new token and holding on to it and buying more with the expectation that the prices will go further up. Now, if you look at Cake, Paul, the interesting thing here is it hasn't really gone parabolic, so to speak. Right? If you just look at the price action here. Now, again, the history is too short. It's not been around for too long. Token came about only on 19th Feb. So again, it's too little data to make any predictions or to even have a proper sort of inference here. But nonetheless, it just seemed like the price has mostly been in this range between 90 and all the way down to like 9. So it seems like it moves between 10 and $9, right? So it moves in that territory, goes up and down and up and down. And right now it's at least for the last couple of weeks has been closer to the $20 mark, and staying upwards of at least $15, right? So now it almost looks like the range of 10 to 20 has become the range of 15 to 20 at this point in time. So maybe I'll just draw it so that one could look at it. So here roughly, right? So this is one level, and you can put another level. And again, just to be very clear, don't read too much. That's what I'm sort of going to advise to every listener, because the data is too less. It's barely been like a couple of months, not even full 2 months. So I think reading too much into the price action isn't going to give us anything too much here. So yeah, so this has been the range, right? Moving from 10 to 20, and now it's become 15 to 20.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, that kind of broader narrative of when SUSHI launched, it was kind of, this is the mercenary, kind of money that's just going to go where the action is, and that pumped up SUSHI. And it doesn't seem that the same things happened with Cake. It's a different set of investors, if you like.
Very much so, I think. Now, again, I'm not big into yield farming personally, so I don't have a great deal of expertise in this. Let me just sort of qualify it like that. But I do feel, from just out of curiosity and playing around and reading about Cake, that Cake is coming up with innovative ideas. So certainly, I think they're gamifying, if you may, this whole sort of AMM world and yield farming world a fair bit, and even introducing things like betting and lottery and what have you, right? And of course, you can provide liquidity in a pool, and then you can I guess go back and stake it again and earn some more. So I think there's just a ton of gamification, which I'm pretty sure that a lot of investors are loving it. So I think that's probably the story of Cake.
Great. All right. Well, that was another great session there with all of those kind of interesting charts and action that's happening there across the ecosystem. Thank you again for sharing some of your insights there, Shanky. That was good. Also looking at some of the candle patterns this week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. And Paul, what we'll do is, just the same way, maybe we'll do an entire session on candles. We can do a session like, let's, get to know your candles or something, right? And we can just study them a little bit, and not study them in isolation and just theoretically, but look at them in action, right? And what did it mean in that particular case? So we could definitely do that. I'm sure some listeners might like it. And then the other piece that might be worth doing is digging deeper into the whole sort of, DeFi and how one could play in that space, which of course we'll cover in our newsletter, right, today. So
second newsletter coming out. We're interested in actually reading through on that content. That's on goingelliptic.com. It's powering our Substack newsletter, so check that out as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And then again, before we sort of wrap up here today, reminder: nothing of this is investment advice. Treat this as educational content. Make your own decision. Get hold of a proper advisor if that's what you need, an investment advisor or a tax advisor. Just treat this as educational content and nothing more. And then the other part is subscribe. There's a lot of content that we're creating. A lot of good guests have already come on board. Go check out our old videos, but also there is a lot more coming. So absolutely, go and enjoy it and give us feedback, and we'll keep creating some content.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks, Shanky, and looking forward to the next session next weekend.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. I think it's exciting as always to do this.
Awesome. See ya.
See you guys.